One of the most bizarre days of my life was that one with my teacher, since he shocked me in a thrilling manner that I never anticipated. A few weeks ago, the last bell rung, and when other students left, the overhead fans roar and the occasional chair scraped across the floor seemed toit was so loud that I looked up from my desk, where there were light pencil smudges, paper blended together. And I eventually found myself staring at Mr. Michael, he was sitting at his desk, leaning forward a little, marking papers with the type of focus that made him unaware of his surroundings. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and his tie was unfastened, were folded up to display forearms that were unusually powerful or had a history off teacher. The sight alone made my stomach spin, but I immediately returned my focus to my task when two knew I had been looking for too long, because I rarely stayed after school 10 minutes ago. The other pupils who had stayed left, leaving me by myself in the room with him. I justified it by telling myself that I had to complete this task. But in my heart, even though I knew that wasn't the whole truth, it felt good to be here alone. With him in the silence, his voice broke in a way that was different and intimate, and I'm still working on it. The calm, fluid stillness brought my attention back to him. So I swiftly responded. He sat up taller, asked a few more questions, then grinned slightly, putting his UR among the few students who genuinely take this seriously, he said, leaning back in his chair with his pen down. My cheeks heated up at the comment, though. As he spoke in a tone that was somewhere between appreciation and laughter, I shrugged. Not sure why, but I suppose I just don't want to fall behind. If it wasn't a huge deal, he nodded and continued to look at me. It's a good habit, he observed. Almost carefully, most people, more than felt required, don't understand how their decisions today will affect them in the future. Something about how he spoke with such sincerity and intensity that it tightened my chest, despite the fact that the words on the paper seemed to swim before my eyes. I managed a tiny smile before returning to my worksheet. For along the only noises were the slight rustle of paper as he moved, and the faint scratch of my pencil. I tried to concentrate on his pile of tasks, but I could sense him there. "I'll be right back," he remarked, noticing that the room looked heavier with only the two of us present. Abruptly, stood up and stretched, pushing his chair back while it scraped the floor. "Okay," I murmured, my voice emerging from the harsh sound in the silent room, softer than I had intended. I watched him approach the door, his confident, unhurried movements in a manner that prevented him from turning away. The door behind him clicked gently, and I released a breath I hadn't known I'd been suppressing until the quiet seemed louder. While I tapped my pencil on the desk, my mind was racing, trying to figure out why my pulse always accelerated and why my chest felt so constricted when he talked to me. It wasn't as though I hadn't already noticed him. Mr. Michael wasn't simply said he was an excellent teacher, who had a way of making history and inspiring you to pay attention, come to life, his voice exuding an innate charm that captured everyone's attention. Especially I shook my head in an attempt to push the idea that it was more than that. Putting my thoughts aside, I told myself that this was foolish and that he was merely being kind, his job, but it made no difference. The door opened once more, and he went back inside. His face was composed as he went back to his desk. He remained silent, but as he sat down, I could feel his eyes on me. "You're awfully quiet today," he observed. "I guess I'm just focused," he answered in a playful but inquisitive tone after a moment. "Good," he murmured with a forced smile. But there was something in he leaned back in his voice and said, "Focus is important." It made my stomach turn. His gaze darting across the room before returning to me. "You don't normally," he seemed to be thinking out loud when he said, "stay this late." I shrugged, keeping he agreed, but I tried to sound as informal as possible because I simply wanted to finish this. He finally answered. "You," with a contemplative expression, as if he were attempting to piece something together, "can always come to me if you need help with anything." His words lingered, making the offer seem heavier than it should have been, like an unspoken vow in the air. I forcefully swallowed, my throat going suddenly dry. I responded, barely raising my voice above a whisper, "Thanks." He gave me a small smile and kept his eyes fixed on me. The room became quiet once more before he returned to his job. Although when I eventually completed the work, I gathered my belongings and stood up because the stress was still very much present. "I'll see you tomorrow," I murmured, swinging my luggage as I felt wobbly underneath. "Take care," he said over my shoulder in a kind but unintelligible voice as too. Could no longer get rid of the sensation that something had felt heavy between us as I left the classroom and entered the empty hallway. The corridor felt more congested, and my chest constricted than before. The weight of his comments made the classroom eerily silent as I left. "You can always come to me," stuck in my head. It was straightforward on the surface, but there was something deeper in the way he spoke that I couldn't ignore his tone. His eyes were staring at you for much too long, enough to make my mind race. I pushed open the closest restroom door and let it swing. The tiles behind me shone in the harsh fluorescent lights, and though as I moved up to the ventilation system, a slight hum filled the room sink. Turning the tap on and letting my fingertips feel the cool water I was momentarily anchored by a sensation that pulled me out of my tumultuous thoughts. I leaned forward and gazed at my image in the mirror. The heat was still lingering in my face, which was flushed cheeks from our talk. I shook my head in an attempt to release the tension that had formed in my chest, and I reminded myself that he was just being kind. I was reading too much into the idea that teachers should care about their kids. But regardless of how much I attempted to explain it, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that something wasn't quite right about the way Harry remembered the calm. The steady tone of his voice as he spoke to me repeated in my head, causing me to slightly grasp the sink's edge. My heart skipped a beat as I turned when the bathroom door creaked open. I was anticipating another kid out of instinct. But when I saw who it was, I gasped. "Mr. Michael." He stopped just inside the threshold and got his tongue in my throat. His eyes briefly locked with mine as he moved past me and through the door, quietly shut behind him. And there was a slight sound of the latch clicking into position appeared, to echo through the tiled area. "Hey," he whispered in a hushed voice. "Although I didn't mean to startle you," but I swallowed hard, feeling my heart rate increase. "Okay," I said hastily, returning to the wash basin to try to regain my composure. "I noticed you left in a bit of a hurry," was the sound that filled the otherwise silent room as the water continued to run. His stance was easy as he spoke, reclining against the wall close to the entrance. But there was something about the way. The air felt heavier as they stared at me, so I said, "Just needed a minute." I said in a shaky voice, shut off the water, and picked up a paper towel. "Rough day?" he remarked, keeping my gaze fixed on the process of drying my hands. His tone softened slightly, and I shrugged, not sure how to respond. "You've seemed a little off lately," he added, nodding his head thoughtfully. "Can I help you with something for a moment? Not just today?" My hand froze. "I'm fine," I murmured rapidly, my voice barely audible as I balled up the paper towel. He didn't answer immediately above a whisper, and the ensuing stillness felt dense with an energy I couldn't identify. I dared to look at him. Through the he wasn't staring at the mirror, and the intensity in his eyes made my chest constrict, like a teacher keeping watch on a pupil. "There was something more profound about you don't have to keep everything bottled up," he murmured, his eyes intimate. Taking a cautious step forward, "You can talk to me if something is upsetting you." I grasped the edge of the sink for support, as I turned to face him completely. "I'm fine," I murmured, even though the words were hollow. My pulse was pounding rapidly, with every beat now resonating loudly. "You sure?" he questioned in my ears as the distance between us appeared to close. He took another step forward, his voice scarcely audible above a mutter. His presence was overpowering due to his deliberate closeness, making I tunable to think clearly. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if it was a desperate gesture or a response to his query. I'm sure I tried to tell myself I could handle whatever this was. His eyes softened and he briefly appeared almost vulnerable as I spoke in a tremulous voice. "Saying you've been on Mimond recently," he acknowledged in a calm, yet firm voice. "I'm not sure if you've observed, but I can tell how much you care and how hard you try." The word struck me like felt my breath catch and muttered, "Thanks," as the word came out, uncomfortable and crooked. I was unable to look him in the eyes, and instead looked down at the— "You don't have to thank me," I said, clutching the wash basin hard against the tiled floor. As he moved closer, he said, "I just want you to know that you're not alone." His tone was so kind and sincere that it hurt my chest. Looked up and met his eyes, and I felt my knees tremble from the intensity of his gaze. Weak. There was a communication gap between us, and I lacked thirds to describe yet could. Sensed the separation in every strand of my body between Nye, could feel the heat emanating from him now that we had all but vanished. The tension was intolerable, and his cologne's subtle aroma permeated the air. We were drawn closer by a magnetic attraction, despite my thoughts screaming for me to move so I could say anything you can do to break the spell. "Mr. Michael, I say," I began, but my voice trailed off, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to say anything at all or what I was going to say. "Call," he said. "Me, James." The words trickling out like a low-key invitation. My chest constricted as the weight of his name hovered between us. I felt as though time had stopped as I gazed up at him, my heart pounding, prevented the world from getting smaller until it was just the two of us in this tiny, peaceful room. And then, as though sensing my hesitancy, he moved forward one last time, closing his hand extended, brushing against mine while we were at a total distance. His fingers hovered close to me in a touch so delicate it sent a chill down my spine. Mine for what seemed like an eternity. A gentle and brief touch that gave me a chill as my breath caught in the dense, heavy air between us and the faint sound of the bathroom fan. I muttered the name James as it seemed to fade into the background. Overpowered by the beating of my heartbeat, his lips quirked into a slight smile as they felt odd yet natural on my tongue. But there was something deeper in his eyes that tightened my chest. He whispered, his voice barely audible above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know I am her." His genuine tone demoralized me, leaving me exposed, and his hand touched mine one more, which surprised me. This time, the touch was purposeful, as though he were pushing the boundaries to see if I would back off, but I didn't feel a surge of contradictory feelings, including dread, excitement, anticipation, and exhilaration, swept over me upon realizing this. Intertwined in a manner that prevented clear thought of his presence, was overpowering the subtle aroma of his perfume that permeated the air as his hand came a little nearer. His fingers caressing mine. "James," I repeated, "S-H-A-K-L. Why this, I don't know. It's okay." He broke off, his eyes unwavering. His comments were soothing. "We don't have to figure it all out right now." They carried a weight, yet they grounded me such that I didn't feel like the floor was giving way under me, Recognition of something that neither of us had the courage to express out, I glanced down at our hands. My fingers twitched as I felt the warmth of his skin near mine, a part of me wishing to retreat in order to establish distance. But a louder, stronger part pushed me to stay. The quiet between us was electric and electrified, and my thoughts were racing with 1,000 ideas that kept running into one another, but none of them felt obvious. All I knew was that he was there, just a few inches away. His presence lighting up thin, a tone that was both reassuring and frightful. "You don't have to be. I'd never, he added quietly, breaking the silence. "I would never hurt you." I was taken aback by his tone's tenderness and experienced a twinge of something. My chest hurt. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I raised my head to meet his, and for the first time I noticed his hesitancy and the glint of doubt in his eyes reflected my own. "I responded. "I'm not afraid," but my voice faltered, and he slowly nodded his gaze. "Okay?" he replied softly, his eyes searching mine as though seeking affirmation. The tightness in the pool between us was getting stronger by the second, and the air was becoming nearly intolerable. He took another approach, his hand eventually resting over mine, his hard yet delicate touch. I felt my breath catch as the touch of his palm against my skin gave me a shock. He said in a quiet voice, "Catch again, this isn't what I planned." Steady. But even if I wasn't sure, I can't ignore it any longer. I wanted to hear his response to how I feel. But his eyes, never the words, weighed heavy and unquestionable between us as we wavered regarding you. I was certain he could hear the tightening of my chest and the loud beating of my pulse. I opened my lips to reply, but nothing came out. I know this is unfair. I know there are lines we're not, he said, softening his tone, supposed to cross. But my mind is racing, trying to make sense of it, and I can't pretend anymore. Among the feelings that flashed across his face as he spoke, Ron had a rawness and vulnerability that made him appear both bigger than life and DM. Not sure what to say, because I acknowledged my impossibly human. You don't have to say anything, he murmured rapidly, his hand barely audible, putting a little more pressure on mine, saying I just needed you to understand. The quiet that ensued was full of unsaid words, and I stared, despite the weight of his confession hanging over us like a heavy blank dot, as I attempted to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. My heart was pounding at him, and then, as if lured by some invisible power, he moved slowly and deliberately, leaning closer, and his free hand reached up and brushed a lock of hair away from my face, stroking my face with his fingertips. My skin felt so light that it made me tremble and made it difficult for me to breathe. And as he paused, his gaze, I felt my heart rate increase. I didn't talk or move while I was looking for my permission, but something in my expression must have been sufficient, because the instant his lips touched mine, he closed the remaining gap between us. The world appeared to tilt against mine, and the initial kiss was gentle but hesitant, as if he were experimenting. But as the second went on, it widened. His palm slipped to the back of my neck, and the tension that had been growing between us finally snapped like a taut wire. His delicate yet forceful touch brought my frozen hands closer to him, reached his chest at my sides. My fingers, digging into the fabric of leaned into him and kissed his shirt. It was everything and nothing like I'd imagined, feeling electrifying, overwhelming, and intense in the nicest manner possible. The result of each unsaid word, each lingering look, and each moment of the strain that had led us to this point ultimately caused us to split apart. We were both breathing heavily, and the excitement in the air between us left me. His eyes were closed, his forehead was resting against mine, and he gave a trembling. He said the words. I shouldn't have done that, but his tone lacked conviction. I was unable to reply, since my head was still reeling from even as the weight of what had just transpired started to settle. The body was still tingling from the intensity of the moment. I couldn't bring myself to mourn. The quiet that followed the kiss, because of me, seemed more intense than anything I had ever encountered, and my heart was racing with every pounding reverberating in my ears as the realization of how serious what had just transpired became. James's hand remained on the nape of my neck, his pressure steady yet tentative, as if he wasn't certain whether he should let go or wasn't ready yet. I opened my eyes slowly, my breathing still erratic, and I looked into his eyes. His expression was a combination of feelings, susceptibility, hesitancy, and another thing I couldn't quite identify. His eyes' unvarnished honesty caused my chest to constrict, and for a split second, I was unsure. I was at a loss for words, and the most bizarre thing was that I felt that he felt the same way, and that this wasn't finished. I'm sorry, he replied. At last, his voice was hardly audible beyond a whisper, yet even as he spoke, his hand kept his thumb from softly grazing my skin, saying, I didn't intend to, shouldn't have. I interrupted him by shaking my head. Don't I added quietly. He glanced at me and said, Don't apologize, more steadily than I had anticipated, scowling a little. But this isn't, we can't. I realize I cut off, my voice shaky a little, but I don't regret it, because his words lingered between us with a lot of weight. On the back of my neck relaxed a little, but he continued to look into my eyes, as if looking for something, affirmation, certainty, or perhaps just realizing that I don't either, he acknowledged. After a while, his voice was so soft that I nearly missed the admission. I felt my heart race as I took in what he had said. It was one thing to sense the tension growing with time, and to feel the draw between us. Booty wasn't ready for it to become real until I heard him speak it out, but it doesn't make it right, he added a regretful tone. Ignored the fact that his comments were making my chest feel like a stone. He was correct, of course. There were 100 reasons why this simply couldn't take her, why it shouldn't have. None of them appeared to have any bearing, Oni said the word to James at that very moment, feeling both excited and vulnerable. I'm not sure what this is, but I don't want it to just pause on my lips. Looking for the proper words. Let's not stop here because I don't want it Tothan let me, he said, observing that I had dropped my defenses. And at that point, when the tension suddenly increased, he spun me around, and I thought, wow, this was crazy. What were we doing? Simply couldn't tell. But after we were finished, I believe 20 to 30 minutes, he let out as his hand eventually left my neck. I felt his trembling breath. He stepped back slightly right away, leaving a coldness that hurt me. He raked a hand through his hair and dropped his eyes to the ground, saying, his voice was strained for both of us as he continued, dangerous. I know, I answered hastily. But that doesn't change how I feel, I said, raising my voice a little. His head raised his head and fixed his gaze on mine, asking, and how do you feel? Voice tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Fear, hope, or perhaps both. I paused. My throat constricted as I tried to find the unfamiliar words. I finally confessed. But I know it's true, since my voice seemed vulnerable. Taken by surprise, he simply gazed at me for a while, unintelligible, and then he approached cautiously. Moving with deliberate care, as though he was pushing the envelope once more. You're not alone in this, he said. I feel it too, he murmured in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper, caused a rush of relief and panic to sweep over me simultaneously. Relief because I was afraid since I didn't see this connection or pull between us, realizing that there was no going. Back meant that we were stepping into an uncrossable queue. I inquired, what do we do now? As we were in unfamiliar country and had no idea what was ahead, my voice quivering. He let out a long sigh, his shoulders drooping a little as though. I don't know if he said it honestly, but I know that the question was too heavy. We can't remain here. I nodded, realizing that he was referring to the loo, felt suddenly too small with its harsh fluorescent lights and reverberating quiet, too exposed. I could feel my chest and the walls appeared to close in around us, tightening under the weight. Of all that was unsaid, he took a step back and created, although the air between us still felt electric, there should be more space between us. We're both still here, he continued, his tone harsher now so no one would notice. I attempted to steady my breathing and my legs as I swallowed hard and nodded once more. Felt wobbly. My fingers hesitating over the handle as I approached the door. James, I muttered softly as I paused, looking back at him one more time. His name as he stared at me, his face softening as I made a gentle plea on my lips. It's going to be, he responded, okay? But I wasn't sure if he was reassuring himself or me. The cool air hit me instantly as I twisted the handle and stepped out into the hallway, creating a sharp contrast. My pulse continued to race in response to the warmth that had persisted between us as I made my walk out. My mind was a jumble of conflicting feelings that it felt unreal to start untangling the walk home. As if I were trapped in some hazy dream in which everything changed. Around me, but I wasn't truly a part of, long shadows were thrown on the pavement by the fading light. Yet it wasn't done yet. The sound of far-off traffic mingling with the sound of leaves, rustling in the wind in my head, was reliving every second, every word, every touch. And his voice reverberated. I think everything would be all right, but did that really mean that everything would be all right? To have entered something that seemed so completely appropriate, and so obviously incorrect at the same time that the weight of it caused my chest to constrict. My mind was racing with all the questions I didn't know the answers to. When I eventually arrived home, I walked straight to my room and gently closed the door. The familiar area behind me seemed strange suddenly, as though I had entered a different reality where nothing made no sense anymore. So I fell onto my bed and stared while dropping my luggage to the ground. I couldn't stop thinking about James as I stared up at the ceiling, trying to take it all in. When he glanced at me, his eyes softened and his voice remained firm, but the way he pronounced my name, as if it meant something, made me feel vulnerable, my lips. And I experienced a surge of warmth as I recalled how the kiss had felt like the pinnacle of fevery silent moment between us. Yet the warmth was accompanied with a surge of worry about what would happen next and how we were going to handle this. Now that Thaleen had been passed, would he act as though it had never occurred and return to being then calm and competent educator that everyone looked up to? Or would it remain a private secret between us? Carried but never mentioned, I closed my eyes and exhaled a trembling breath as it tried to calm myself, because his words and touch were still so clear in my mind, real that it gave me a chest dash. And even though I didn't want to lose that sensation, realized how risky it was to keep it, and the following day at school seemed like walking on a tight RP with each step. Look, and interaction was fraught with the potential for me to stumble into something I wasn't prepared to deal with, to avoid the chance of sprinting. He took the long route around the building and avoided the hallway close to his classroom by the time fourth period arrived. I was unable to completely avoid him. While I was walking to his classroom, my heart was racing in my chest. The door was open, and I could hear students talking softly while they awaited the start of the lesson, paused in the doorway, looking around the room before focusing on him. He appeared cool and collected as he stood at his desk, his gaze fixed on a pile of papers. In front of him, as if nothing had occurred, and I briefly questioned whether I had imagined anything. But then he looked up and met my eyes, and I knew immediately, unspoken but indisputable. The link persisted. As soon as the class started speaking, I slid into my seat with my head down, carried the same assured comfort as usual. Yet I couldn't help but examine each in a very inflection, looking for anything that would show what he was thinking. The lecture went by quickly. His voice's steady beat was both calming and disturbing, so I tried to lose focus, myself in the cozy familiarity of his instruction. Yet my thoughts kept returning Toto the Loo, to the sensation of his hand on my lips. Toe brushed against me with such subdued intensity that I remained when the bell rang, as the other students trickled out. I sat with my fists gripping the corners of my desk. My fingers were sweating, and my pulse was pounding as I debated whether to stay or wanted to flee to avoid the inevitable conversation, but I also a louder, braver component had to be aware of our position. Hey. His steady, gentle voice interrupted my thoughts, and I checked my breath, catching in my throat when I noticed him standing next to my desk. His eyes were serene, yet there a ferocity that the day before had left me gasping for air. "You okay?" asked Hisi, nodded in a tone full of subdued worry, despite the lump in my throat making my voice was hardly heard as I struggled to utter "yeah." And he hesitated. He looked into my eyes and said, "Can we talk?" With a little lowered voice as I nodded once more, my pulse thumping. I swallowed hard. "Okay," he indicated the chamber felt like the door waited for the final pupils to depart before gently closing it. Behind them, he leaned against the edge of his desk, and everything was unbelievably quiet now, save for the hum of the overhead light. I'd been thinking about yesterday when he started crossing his arms over his chest. I nodded, feeling my chest tighten as he spoke calmly but measuredly about what had transpired. I waited for him to finish speaking, and I'm glad he did, giving me a shock. "But I must let you know that this is a complex situation. I know I spoke hastily and trembled, but I don't want to act like it didn't happen." His face softened slightly. He acknowledged with a smile, tugging at the edges of his lips. "Neither do I, but we have to exercise caution for the benefit of both of us." His words weighed heavily on me, and I slowly nodded in understanding. Meant that even though it hurt my chest, so what now? I said, my voice just above whisper. He exhales deeply, and his eyes briefly fall to the ground. I don't know what he said honestly just before we met again, but I do know his voice was so vulnerable that it made my chest hurt, care more about you than I should, tighten. And in spite of the uncertainty that hung over me, I had a glimmer of optimism. I murmured softly, "I care about you too," before I could stop myself then. With a genuine smile that brightened his face and raised my heart rate, he grinned. "We'll figure this out," he murmured in a tone that was full of silent resolve. Wow. And at that precise instant when the world's weight appeared to lighten a little, and I trusted him, but I am not sure if this is typical of me and my teacher. But I don't mind at all. Please let me know what you think. Comments, likes, and subscriptions.